Hello, and welcome to Friendship, Wellness, and Wisdom with your hosts, Heather and Rachel.
Together, we're here to talk about all things self-care, from fitness to mindfulness and everything in between.
Whether it's yoga, Tai Chi, Pilates, or practices like tapping and meditation, we're here to help you discover new ways to care for yourself.
We'll also share tips on positive self-talk, finding time for self-care, and creating routines that stick.
We're here to provide you with plenty of tips, tricks, and unsolicited life advice.
Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. Join our community, and together we can explore the path to wellness. All right, well, welcome back to another episode of Friendship, Wellness, and Wisdom. Today we're going to dive into a topic that is at the core of emotional well-being, and that is understanding the balance between responsibility and accountability when it comes to feelings and relationships. So this episode is based on a blog from See Life as a Muse, where we explore how our emotions shape our experiences and how taking responsibility for those emotions can empower us to lead more fulfilling lives. We're also going to touch on the importance of people being accountable for their own words, all while maintaining empathy and fostering an open communication. So let's get started.
So let's start off with the definition or the concepts of responsibility and accountability when it comes to what we're talking about today, right? It's understanding them in the emotions and the relationship piece of life, right? What is accountability? What is responsibility in this case? Responsibility is about ownership of your own feelings, thoughts, and actions. It means recognizing that how you perceive emotions and respond to life's events is entirely within your control. In other words, you are responsible for your emotional well-being, and your happiness. Accountability, on the other hand, involves acknowledging the impact of your words or your actions onto someone else. It's about taking ownership of how your behavior affects others and being a good listener, apologetic when need to be, making changes if necessary when you are speaking to somebody else or listening to somebody else in that whole communication piece. And it's just really taking accountability for your part in the relationship and in the discussion. And so understanding the difference between these two concepts leads us to a healthier relationship. By being responsible of your feelings, you empower yourself. And by holding yourself accountable, you promote empathy and understanding when interacting with others.
All right. So we're going to, we'll go through these questions so that we can bring more clarity to our topic. So, yeah. All right. So first question is, why does owning your emotions matter so much in everyday life?
Yeah. So owning your emotion gives you the power, right? It's empowering to own your emotions, right? You take control of your response. We've talked about response and reacting, right? And so we take control of our response when we're empowered. And so it helps us build self-awareness. It allows us to understand and manage our feelings. It also helps us not to play the blame game, right? It helps us to own it, pretty much. Whatever we're feeling, we're owning it.
So how can understanding the difference between accountability and responsibility help our relationships thrive?
Recognizing the difference helps us maintain healthier relationships. But again, going back to that empowering, right? And it empowers us. When you are empowered to manage your emotions and well-being, you're fostering open communication, you're listening with empathy, you're paying attention, you're in the now, you're aware, right? We talk about, not living in the past and living in the future, living in the present. So it kind of gives you um, that moment to really just hone in on the conversation at hand, right? And then to take responsibility and accountability for how we're communicating back and forth and how we're feeling about the communication.
So now, as far as self-awareness goes, what role is that going to play in how we handle our emotions?
So self-awareness helps us identify the triggers, right? It helps us process the emotions and respond thoughtfully, instead of reacting impulsively like we do, right? Um, it's the foundation of understanding why we feel certain ways and choosing how to respond. So when
Okay.
you understand what your triggers are, when you understand how things make you feel, it's really empowering, because now you can say, this conversation is either not for me, or I can regroup myself to have a really emotionally intelligent conversation where my emotions are kind of in check and my
Mm-hmm.
responses are in check.
All right. So it's really, I just to set an example, say we're having a conversation and something you bring up, I get offended by
Hmm.
it. And it's very clear to me that you're just making a statement about something that has absolutely nothing to do with me.
Hmm.
So if I'm being like emotionally responsible, if I am self-aware, I'm like, hey, what she said just triggered me, but none of that is reflect like a reflection on me. None of it has to do with me. Like this
Right,
topic wasn't about
right.
anything that has to do with me. She's not calling me out. She's not saying I am this way.
Right.
And when you're self-aware, you can be like, okay, this is really bothering me. And you've got some options here, right? You can either say, I don't know if I can handle this conversation. I noticed when you said this, like I got really upset
Hmm.
and I'm not sure why. And you can go on that way and continue, or you might want to just walk away from the conversation and then revisit it another time. And I think that's a really great part of being self-aware is like,
Yes.
oh, hey, I'm noticing this is really bothering me, but I also know it's not directed towards me.
Hmm.
So maybe I'm going to say something here. I'm going to let the other
Right.
person know, like, I know that you did not mean to upset me, but
Right.
for some reason you mentioned this and I just got really emotional. So I don't know if I can talk about this right now.
Right.
We may need to do it later. Or like if you're in a situation where you can't do that, you may need to just kind of put yourself in check. Like,
And the other person being self-aware too, the other person that said whatever they
mhm,
said that triggered you, them being able to literally have empathy for your demeanor changing, your emotions changing. If you're self-aware, if you're aware of the situation that you're in, you're going to read the room and you're going to
yeah.
know something has changed, right? The temperature
Mhm.
of the room has now changed.
Absolutely. And I think really that one of the like as far as like accountability goes and responsibility goes, it's, as responsible adults when we're having these conversations instead of just, cursing and walking away,
Right.
like it's just taking that moment and being like, "Hey, this really bothered me." And for the most part, unless you're dealing with someone who's an absolute jerk, like
Yes.
you should be able to say, "Hey, this is something like I can't really deal with this conversation. Like we need to table this." Um, and that's part of the responsibility
Right.
of the whole thing. So,
Yeah. I can't be responsible for how you take something, but
right.
can be accountable for my part in what was said or how it was said, the tone that it was said in.
Right. Unless you're like straight up trying to like piss somebody off and then
Right.
and then
Right.
you're, responsible and accountable for all of those things. Otherwise, it's kind of on the other person who's overreacting. But anyways, let's move on. All right. So, can you share an example of how someone might take responsibility for their feelings in a tough situation?
Yeah.
So,
So, imagine you say something to a colleague, something critical, instead of, or a colleague says something to you critical. And then instead of you getting hurt right away, you take a moment to reflect,
mhm,
am I stressed? Did I not get enough sleep? Would this person intentionally try to hurt me? What was their intention behind it? Um, Not all communication comes out well. I mean, that's just
yeah.
the way it is. And just because somebody says something to you that hits a nerve or stresses you out or something like that, it might not be their intention. I would say more so than not, it is not somebody's intention to blatantly hurt somebody else, right? Especially as adults. Now, kids,
Yeah.
something totally different, right?
Yeah.
But as adults, we're really just trying to communicate the best we can. So, this is, your time to self-reflect, and it helps you to like kind of process what's happening, what's
Hmm.
being said, how it's being said, and then ask the person, hey, I didn't really understand what you were telling me. I didn't really take what you were telling me well. Can you rephrase it? Can you? And, hopefully they'll be very empathetic to you taking offense or not understanding or whatever
Yeah.
and rephrase it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think too, like a big part of the responsibility sometimes is just letting the other person know, hey, I'm a little uncomfortable with this, or, that's part of your responsibility,
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
how you're feeling, and holding up your end of the conversation.
Yes.
All right. So what does accountability look like in our relationships, in our very grown up relationships that we're
Yes.
we're trying
In
to
our
have
very
here?
grown up, we hope, right? Our very grown up
I'm
relationship.
I'm very grown up.
Uh, Accountability is about recognizing when your actions have effect on someone else, right? Owning up to it and making the change. So, like I said, if you can read the room, if you are in the moment of the conversation and you have self awareness of yourself, the other person has self awareness of them, you're going to know that the temperature changed in the room. You're going to know that somebody is taking offense, even if they don't say they are. Their
Right.
body language is going to tell you, their tone is going to tell you, things are going to tell you, take those keys, right? And so, um, you don't want to say something that's hurtful to somebody, but you don't always know what's going to hurt somebody. But as soon as that tone changes, you have to take accountability for the words that are coming out of your mouth,
Hmm.
or the tone of the words that are coming out of your mouth, how it's being said.
Yeah, I know sometimes I kind of have to put myself in check, because I will too often, especially if I'm like really wrapped up in the things that I'm doing, I will literally just kind of say things out loud that I'm thinking, or like if something upset me,
Hmm.
I'll just, because it's easier for me to deal with, I'll kind of say it like, "Oh my god, this is driving me crazy, blah blah
Right.
blah." And I had to learn to be careful,
Yeah.
because that really bothers some people, and even though you're not directing anything at like what they did, or maybe they had a part to play in whatever it is that you're upset about.
Right.
And most of the time I was never upset at anyone. I was just like, I had a problem or like an issue dealing with something because of that situation.
Right.
Not on anyone else, just on me, but I would verbalize it, because that's my way of processing things. And
Yeah.
I had to learn, like, again, to read the room, because some people will automatically think like if they had a part to play in whatever that thing was, that you're then
Right.
upset with them. So I've had to be like, okay, this bothers this person. So like if I need to have this moment, like I need to go have it like over here where I'm by myself,
Right.
or you always have, right? There's always that friend that like if you have something to complain about, like they're your go-to person,
Uh-huh.
you know. So,
Hmm.
you find them, because they're going to appreciate the fact that you're just, flying off
Venting it
the
out.
handle about, yeah, you're venting about your stupid little thing. And that's part of being responsible for that. It's like, you go find the person who appreciates.
And see, like I take it like completely different. I don't believe that anybody is accountable, even if they hurt my
Right.
feelings, even if they're trying to be mean to me.
Right.
Um, I don't believe that they're accountable for how I take it and how I
No,
feel and how I digest and respond
of
to it.
course not.
And the only thing that I can do is be responsible for who I am, my
Hmm.
actions, and be accountable for how I treat others. Right.
Of course. Hmm.
And so I think that's the key. And I know it's so much easier said than done, right? Because
Absolutely.
communication, I don't care who you are, communication's hard. It's hard because you never know what somebody else is going through. You don't know how other people live. You don't know how they believe. You don't like there's so many factors to communication,
Absolutely.
and you really have to be in the here and now when you communicate. I mean, that is like key for everything. And you have, in that communication, you have to be in the here and now on the other end of the communication with listening. You know, you can't just kind of just like go into autopilot in a conversation, because as soon as you do that, then things start.
Well, you can, but then, you kind of miss out on everything that's happening, and you
Yeah,
lose sight of the the whole thing. And if you're trying to work something out, you're not going to
right,
resolve anything.
right.
So,
Well, and it's not respectful. I mean,
no, it's
it's
completely
not
disrespectful.
respectful to the other person. It's not
Of course
respectful
not.
to you, because now you're lost. You don't know
Yeah, absolutely. And then you're like, "Oh my god, wait, what just happened? Where what how do?"
what are you talking about? So, yeah. So, I mean, it's, communication's hard. And, this is just one tool to work through communication.
Absolutely. So, speaking of which, so why is it so important to have open conversations about feelings and accountability?
Well, open conversations help us to express how some, actions affected us, right?
Mhm.
And so having honest, respectful conversations, not
Mhm.
those the blame game, you, but actually asking the person, why did you say this? When you said X, I felt Y.
Mhm.
And this is because, this approach allows the person to like understand where you're coming from and understand maybe where you've been and things like that. And so it's really important to, I think that's the very responsible thing to do, is when something bothers you, having that conversation. We've mentioned this several times before. You're showing people how to treat you,
Yeah.
right? And so if you're never having the conversation when something makes you uncomfortable, you're telling people that's okay,
Right.
and they don't know any better.
Well, no, and
So,
then too, in the same vein, instead of and not saying anything and then flying off the handle and being mad and not letting anyone know why is just going to make them think that you're either just immature,
right.
irresponsible, or just
Yeah.
a flat out jackass. Like, I mean,
Or all of the above.
or yeah, it could be all that too. So, I mean, it's important, and
Mm,
it might take some time, like when you're learning how to do this, because
yes.
if you're not in a place and you're not in relationships where that is currently how conversations are going,
Hmm.
it's a skill that
Yeah.
you then need to
Yeah.
like learn and acquire. And honestly, one of those things that's great, like practicing like with your friends or someone that you feel really comfortable with.
Yeah.
That's the time to like maybe just say, "Hey, like I noticed this was going on. I was happening at work. If what would you say? How do we do this?" Because I don't. I mean, a lot of the conversations that took place, I feel like when I was growing up, and I did have a few people who were like super respectful and really cared
Hmm.
about like my end of things and what I had to say, but also at the same time, I feel like I also ran into a lot of things where you would ask questions or you would say something made you feel a certain way, and you'd get told, "Well, I don't really care what you're feeling or how you're feeling
Hmm.
about that. This is this and that's it. So I'm going to tell you to do this, you're going to do this, and we're going to move on." And I feel like, when if you come from a place like that where that's the reinforcement that you're getting, it's going to be a little bit more difficult and even more challenging to have these conversations. So it's just one of those things that you may want to, if it's not what's common, it's something you might want to practice. And anyone you are close and comfortable with, try having those conversations there, like bring up the subjects that you might want to say that, "Hey, I noticed this was going on like this. I wanted to let you know this because I'm comfortable with you. Can we
Right.
talk about this? Can I tell you how I'm feeling?" And that's a good way to get comfortable doing it
Hmm.
with more and more people.
Going back to the reaction and the response, right?
Mhm.
It's all about that good communication. Practice, when you practice responding,
Yeah.
right? When your brain is process, like even if you pretend talk to the person and
Mhm.
you practice a response, practice
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
practice what response can be plugged in somewhere, So it keeps the conversation moving and the conversation civil, and hopefully it gets the point across, right?
I also like to take note of people who I find have great communication skills and also really good listening skills, and I will actually take the time to have more conversations with those people.
Oh, that's awesome.
Or listen to, like, when they're explaining something to someone else and you happen to be in the room without, if you're not um being intrusive or whatever.
Hmm.
It's really great to find someone that you like the way that they communicate, especially in like a work setting or
Yes.
something like that. When you find someone who's really good at that, listen, try to listen to them, have more conversations with them so that
Hmm.
you can pick up on some of the ways that they're communicating things.
Right.
And if you spend more time with them and speaking with them, it's a really great way to kind of develop your own style of communication, is by
Yeah.
finding someone you're like, hey, like, this person really makes everything clear. I like the way they put things out there. You can then kind of emulate that.
Yeah, totally. And probably, create it and make it your own,
Oh, of course. Yeah.
with,
But we
just
need these
using,
examples.
yeah, just using those examples to, like, somebody leading by example is a great way to learn for sure.
How does taking responsibility for our own feelings set us free emotionally?
Taking responsibility gives you control over your emotional well-being, right? So it's freeing you from relying on others for your happiness, for your joy. And so we are responsible for our own happiness. We are responsible for our own joy. And it allows us to handle challenges with resilience and self compassion and a balanced approach, right?
Mhm.
And we talk about all the time how, starting with compassion with self is key, right?
Mhm.
And so when we're taking control of our emotions, when we're taking control of our actions and are taking responsibility for our own emotions and taking accountability for the way we treat others, it gives us all the control of how we are going to teach people how to treat us, how we're going to treat others. It helps you show people, like you just talked about emulating somebody. Like,
Mhm.
it shows people around you how, even if it's not the person you're talking to, it shows the people around you how you want to be spoke to, how you want to speak to them,
Right.
right? And so it really just gives you all the control of what you're doing and how you're responding, reacting, you know, and communicating.
Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of want to keep in mind that this does take some time to cultivate if it
Hmm.
is not your normal. So you may be someone who tends to react very quickly and get upset. And the best way to start to take that control, and you're not going to be in complete control all of the time, but the best way to start to take control is noticing. So if you notice you're
Hmm.
overreacting, stop. Take a breath, ask yourself why you're having this reaction.
Hmm.
And once you start, like, kind of looking into it, the more pauses you take before you react, the more it becomes a habit and the more
Right.
you can start to process what you're feeling and when you're feeling it, and it gives you that sense of control. You're never going to be in complete and utter control. And it's fine. We're all going to lose it sometimes, right? We can't all be perfect, but this is a great way to kind of cultivate that self control and to kind of work on how you're presenting yourself
Yeah,
to
totally.
others.
Yeah. And know that even after you master it, right? If you're going to call it mastering it,
Right. But it's
even
kind of
after,
it's a practice, kind of
yeah,
like money. It's a
yeah,
practice.
even after you think, man, I've gotten really good at this, and
Hmm.
I can be in difficult conversations. I could be in difficult situations, whatever. The reality is, there is moments that you will revert.
Of
It's
course.
utterly impossible to be even keeled all the time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right. So we've got a few more here. So, what does it really mean when we say happiness comes from within?
Happiness. It means that your happiness is ultimately your responsibility. By taking ownership of your emotions and fostering accountability for your relationships, you create a fulfilling life when happiness is nurtured from within, right? And so we have to cultivate that. We have to cultivate that in ourselves. And things will happen around you, and things will happen that make you sad, and things will happen that will make you angry and everything. But if I call it leading with love, if you lead with love with everything and you cultivate that in your heart, then you are cultivating happiness. And so external things are going to happen, and external things are going to make you sad and make you angry and all frustrated and whatever. But the reality is you can still have happiness in your heart, even though externally things are not well.
Yeah, so it's funny. I just posted a blog. What was it? Not this past Sunday, but like the Sunday before, about the happiness habit and how
Yes.
to make happiness your habit, because a lot of times we talk about happiness being a choice,
Right.
right? And no one just goes, "Hey, I'm going to be happy," and then click,
Yeah.
you're just happy. No, it's a habit. It's the habit of finding all the little things and all the reasons to smile and all the ways to, just not let what the other person said bother you or take it all personally. And it's so funny because all of these things just kind of tie into each other.
Right.
So, that's up there. I have that. If you want to check out some of that happiness stuff, it's just funny that this came up in the way that it did, because I just wrote a blog like
Yes, totally.
pretty much covering a lot of those bases. So what is the key takeaway from today's discussion on emotions and responsibility?
While others can influence our emotions, right? It's inevitable. People say things, people do things, people are insensitive, things happen. But while that's all happening, ultimately, it is our own responsibility. It is our own responsibility for our own happiness. It is our own accountability for how we treat others. And so people should always be accountable for their actions, their words, and how they affect others. They should try to be as respectful and lead with love and kindness as much as you can. But it's a dance, right? It's a balance. And so you have to make sure that you are being self-responsible, right? And accountable. Like you have to do this dance back and forth on how you're treating others, even when they're not treating you so great, but how you're also communicating with respect. And so to do that fine dance is really the takeaway, right? And it's really with everything, balance. So
it's the key thing. It's just that simple, but sometimes it's just not that easy. It
yeah.
definitely takes work. All right. So as we're wrapping up today's episode, so let's remember that taking responsibility for your emotions is empowering. It allows you to live a life with emotional freedom, knowing that your well-being isn't dependent on others. And while accountability is important in relationships, it should always come with empathy and understanding. By fostering accountability, you create healthier, more respectful conditions. Thank you for joining us on Friendship, Wellness, and Wisdom. Take care of yourself, own your emotions, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Friendship, Wellness, and Wisdom. Don't forget to subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And follow us on social media for more updates. See you next time.